Yeah, I'm officially welcoming us to Global Solutions for a Migrating World, or whatever the very fancy title we put on this was. And thank you, David, so much for agreeing to kick us off. David's just going to kind of launch into his story and just have a share for 15-ish minutes, 10, 15, 20, we'll see. And then we're just going to have a conversation and see what questions come up and where we want to go from there. Welcome, David. Oh, you're on mute.
Now I'm unmuted, right? You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this call. I'm calling from Berlin, Germany, and I'll explain why later. But yeah, I am on a journey, and our work is on a journey. And so I'm going to quickly explain what it is we do just to get people on the same page, and then talk about a little bit about the international. And I'll be mindful of time because I want to get to the discussion too. That's the most interesting part. But thank you, Brittany, for setting this up also, and to Ashoka. Yeah, big Ashoka fan, big Brittany fan here. So Welcoming America, which is where this work began, we work in communities. Our focus is supporting local communities around becoming more welcoming to everybody, but particularly to and specifically to immigrants and refugees. And we help communities in two areas. One is how to become more welcoming from a cultural perspective, and we have a methodology that we actually developed in Nashville, Tennessee, back in the mid-2000s. Nashville had a very rapid growing immigrant population and refugee population, and there was a backlash in the community from that changing demographic situation. And so we developed a methodology that involves bringing leaders and volunteers in the community together to try to change the climate, as well as helping train volunteers across a city or a town to have contact events. So dialogues, conversations between longtime residents and newcomers to reduce fear and build understanding. And then there's also a piece around communications, because a lot of times when there's rapidly changing demographics, the messages are really bad and inaccurate. And so the methodology there is around billboards, radio ads. That's what we did the first time anyway, in Nashville. Any kind of communications tools that can get the messages of immigrants who are really contributing. 99.9% of the community wants to really contribute and is contributing and shares the values of the local population, but those stories aren't usually heard. And so we wanted to turn that around. And I should say, from a personal perspective, I started the work in Nashville after living in Ecuador and in South America, where I was really welcomed by a family and by the community, and that made a big difference for me in my life and my learning Spanish, and and my just growing as a human being. And when I came back, I wanted things to be that way. That when people came to the U.S., they also would have a welcome. So that's the kind of cultural piece of what we do. And then the other part is, once the culture is a little stabilized and you're not in the middle of a backlash, then there's the work we do around more institutions. So, for example, if a city like Dayton, Ohio comes to us and says we want to, we're not a hostile to an environment or a fearful environment, but we are wanting to attract more immigrants. We want to integrate people more. It's about bringing people together from all of the different sectors of the community, especially the immigrant and refugee community, to say, what are the barriers to full inclusion in this community, and how do we reduce them through policy, through programs, through the planning process that our community can undergo together. So we first did that kind of process in Nashville, and then and Dayton was the first community that did it in the Midwest. And now we work with over 200 communities in the United States. And we're advancing the work further in the United States through a standard that took about 1.5 years to develop. So now there's a standard for welcoming that cities can use. And we actually certify cities as welcoming. And that means they have all of these programs that would facilitate contact and build an understanding, but also all the policies in place that are going to ensure that if somebody arrives, they really are going to get that welcome that everybody wants. And so we've gone. We have membership. The cities that we work with are members, and we have municipal governments as members and nonprofits in those same communities that are members. And we work with about 200 communities in the United States. But the global piece started happening organically, starting in Germany. We got invited to Germany to speak about the work that we were doing about 5 or 6 years ago. And then when the big numbers started coming, over 1 million people in 2015 to Germany because of the welcoming policies of the government, we reached back out to see if they would want a little more support. Hey, Ben, not now, buddy. Yeah, okay, just throw it out, buddy. Sorry, this is the glamour of of working from home. Benny, can you close the door, buddy? Thanks. Sorry, everybody. That's my son Benedict, 7-year-old. The 5-year-old hasn't come in yet. That's Isaac. Somebody's waving. Miko's waving. So anyway, the international work started really organically in Germany, but then after the quote unquote migration crisis, whatever you want to call it, we started an exchange program that was funded by the government of Germany and several other foundations. And exchange is a really good, powerful tool for starting expansion in other places, because what it did is bring lots of German cities and stakeholders from Germany to the United States to see cities in our 200 plus city network, sort of see it firsthand, understand, but also our cities got to go there and learn from a place that's really, a country that's really trying to do welcome in a way that frankly the United States is not doing, quite the opposite at the moment. But it was inspiring for both parties, but it also created very fertile ground for then the development of a network and a movement like the kind of movement that we're trying to build in the United States and Germany. So in Germany, the way we're developing the model and the way we're developing the model in other places in general is, cities want to do more on this issue. They want to be more inclusive, unlike often their national governments, but they need the tools and they need to connect with others that are doing that. And so whether it's Germany, or we're also working in Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, starting to do work in Sweden, and all those places, the networks there of localities trying to be welcoming don't really exist or aren't very strong. And so we find local partners. So in Australia, it's a national nonprofit and a foundation that are leading now a Welcoming Cities network, and they've developed a standard for welcoming in Australia that is developed, with ours as a basis, but also, just it caters to it's specific to Australia. And in New Zealand, the national government found out about our work and approached us, and now they're the national partner facilitating the city network. It's 29 cities in Australia. It's about 8 cities so far in New Zealand. But New Zealand also has now a New Zealand standard for welcoming, and is getting ready to start doing certification like we do in the United States. And so in each place, in Germany, we have a standard creator, which is a foundation actually, but we don't, we're still working on building out the network. And so it's never the same in each place, and you have to be very flexible and you have to be very patient. And we can get more into it, but we do now have a network of about 5 countries that are building welcoming movements and really making a lot of strides towards that. Bottom-up movements to change the narrative, to change welcome in those places. And they're connected now with one another, but they're also connected with other cities around the world. So for example, Germany is creating the Bertelsmann Foundation is creating the indicators for Germany around welcoming. And they've talked a lot to our partners around the world, including, especially, they really like the New Zealand standard. So now the Germany standard is a lot based on the New Zealand standard. So there's a lot of that connection back and forth globally, which is there's so many innovations that you can really mine if that connection exists and those relationships exist. And so it's happening. It's not easy, and we can talk about all the challenges and everything, but it is exciting, and I'm having fun doing it. And I founded Welcoming America, and I should say, when I decided to move into this international position, I didn't feel like I could run the, the America piece, which is still the heart of the work, and be based here. And I like the energy of just trying to convince new places that this is a good idea, and being able to spend my time doing that is very fulfilling for me. And so I moved to Germany, and I became the head of Welcoming International Initiative. And then Rachel Parrish, who had been our managing director and deputy director, became the executive director of Welcoming America. And so I work closely with her, and she is, technically my boss. And just to be clear, I mean, it's an unconventional arrangement, but it allows me to not have to be responsible for all the fundraising and all that kind of stuff. But I have a complete and total trust with her, and we have a great relationship. And so it's just a partnership, and it works really well for us. About a year in, as we are now, to this new chapter. So anyway, lots of things to talk about, but I'll stop talking so we can get into the conversation.
Thanks, David. Friends, as we're going, if you have questions that are coming up, one, we can just, this is informal, so pretend you have your mug of tea or your glass of wine or whatever. And also, if reactions are coming up, we're many people. So also just like if you want to flag things in the chat, that's a great tool to use as well. I'll kick us off with a question because it's, I think, one that a lot of people are coming to this call with, which is just like the dance between, just like how that, and you mentioned this, the process of building buy-in when you're seeing an opportunity for expansion or a deepening of the work in a new place or a new area. I think this translates. Just a little bit about what that process was like is something I think there's curiosity.
So do you mean, because there's building buy-in externally?
Internally, sorry.
So you mean internally?
Yeah, with your team or your board or.
Yeah, that's been like a 3 or 4 year process. It's not been, so yeah, like Welcoming America was not, it's becoming an international organization. I predict in 2 years we'll just be called Welcoming and be just known as an international organization. That's my hope. And we already are an international organization, really. But yeah, so, and we're taking steps towards that already, but that's been a long process, and it's still a process because we're still not Welcoming International. We're welcoming, or we're not welcoming, we're Welcoming America with a project called Welcoming International. And so getting there has taken a long time, and just the exchange was a good place to start with Germany, because our board and our members really did feel like there was a lot to learn from Germany. I mean, nowhere else was receiving this number of refugees in the industrialized world. But there's also, and we want to do work eventually in places like Jordan, that frankly has received more. Turkey's a little complex, but also receiving more than Germany, Lebanon. But numerically, Germany is one of the leaders in the world in this now, in the sheer number of refugees they took in the last couple of years. And so our cities really wanted to learn from that. And so to pitch that to the board as a chance to learn about how you do this at scale and just all the lessons, it wasn't that hard of a sell, frankly, to the board. And then, by doing that work, we started to gain an international reputation. And then when we got approached by a foundation and a nonprofit in Australia, we said, well, again, this is another learning opportunity. A, B, it's paid for. This foundation in Australia wants to do it, and they're willing to pay for it. They're willing to pay us some to help to bring the model there. And so again, we learned a lot from Germany. Why don't we try this learning and this exchange in Australia? And slowly, you put a lobster in the water and you turn up the heat slowly. That's a bad version of the analogy. I don't know what the good version of the analogy is. I use the analogy of viral also for our work, which is not a positive analogy. So if you have good analogies for lobsters in water or viruses, I would like them. but it is kind of like you just slowly get people accustomed to the idea that, yeah, actually, why wouldn't we want this? Immigration is a global issue. Why wouldn't we want to learn from all the innovations in other places? And why wouldn't we want to connect the pieces together? And so doing it a little step at a time, showing how it's benefiting our members always in the US has been really an important way to take these baby steps. And then when we got an opportunity, for funding for the international work specifically, so it wasn't just us working with Australia or us working with New Zealand or Germany or whatever, but it was like there's a funder, OSF, that's willing to help us bring all these pieces together and create this project that would, not just have bilateral relationships, but a full network. By that point, there was enough buy-in that I was able to make it happen, and plus we had the money for it, so that didn't hurt either. So that it's still a process, but that's that slow, steady, demonstrate the value for the local, for the home participants, and keep moving slowly but methodically, and you can get there.
I have a question. David, I just want to start off by saying I'm so proud of you. I mean,
Aww.
I remember when you were just here in Atlanta and I was hearing about all the great stuff you were doing in the US. So to hear how you've expanded, and sounds like, it's really gone. I mean, I'm sure there's been issues and bumps along the way, but the fact that you're living now in Germany says a lot. So my question, I have so many questions, but I'll limit it. Is really about, you mentioned you have the money now to do, some of this growth. So in our business, a lot of we have a lot of federal contracts, and, development is usually that's coming from unrestricted dollars through donors and so forth. And that's where that expansion support would come from. So talk a little bit about dollars that you've received for this expansion to different countries outside of the area where your maybe primary donors know your work to be. You understand what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciate your kind words, Angela. Thank you. But still coming home to Atlanta for the holidays. So if you want to get together, let me know. Hopefully the kids will still want to go back after we're in Atlanta. But they will. They like it. But so yeah, to answer your question, again, it's a process. I think. I mean, I'm still trying to learn the international landscape, because what I've found so far in the couple of years that I've been working, slowly more on this building this infrastructure up, is that there aren't a ton of foundations, at least that I know of, that give money to international, like some give to international exchange, and again, the exchange is a helpful first step, but not that many that give to like international network building. There should be a lot of funders for it, but we're still developing the list, and if anyone has suggestions, we're all ears. But so the kind of model that we're trying to develop, that I'm trying to develop, is pretty lean. Keeping that in mind, that there's not a ton of international funders, at least, not at the beginning. Maybe we'll find some rich person who wants to bankroll it all. But right now, we have our funding mostly for the network piece comes from OSF, both in the US and in Europe. So those are two different kind of pots of money from Open Society foundations, but that you need to have like an entrepreneurial, international minded foundation, I think, that's willing to say, okay, go for it, like try. But then when it comes to the national work, all of that's been funded through the sorry, my phone was blinking. I have to plug it in at some point soon. Through national funders. So once we developed a reputation for it long enough in Germany, and had local partners who had relationships with funders, and found good local partners to work with those funders, we were able to get the work, and they were able to get the work funded locally. And so we're not investing in any way financially in Australia, New Zealand, Germany, any of that. That's all being funded locally. And if you find good partners locally, finding good partners is really important. And it's better to wait until you find the right partner. But if the right partner can find the right funder, you can get that work funded in country. So really the hardest funding is the funding that is like the connector of all of that. But my vision for that is not to make it ever be like a huge, big team. But again, we have these standards of welcoming. And so if our job eventually is sort of helping support standards creators, welcoming standards creators in all these countries, and then they build out the movements, I don't envision that being such a high dollar amount that we can't find resources. So
cool. Thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to ask a question regarding expansion. So first, congratulations, David. This sounds like amazing and super important, solutions, especially in today's time. Now, I mean, we talk a lot about sort of systemic change. How do we create systems that really can address these challenges? And obviously, it looks like you have this system now that, if you had all the right partners, you could, in theory, replicate that in every single country where there are refugees. So, and that would be the goal. So, and let's say in an ideal world. So what does it take? How do you go about that? How do you go about this, that you go to the governments or to big NGOs and say, this is the solution, take it to your countries and follow that to-do list? And, how do you do that? How do you, if you say, I'm in 5 countries now and I want to be in 15 by the end of next year? Am I just making this up? But how would you do that? How do you go about that? Because now you have sort of more traction, the hardest is the first country or the second, and some with 5, suddenly the next come much easier. So how do you do that?
So, I mean, it's a similar dynamic I find to the work that we do with cities. Like in the United States, the first couple cities that we worked with, you had to sort of support them the most, and you had to really shepherd them along.
Exactly.
Because they were lifting, the biggest rocks, and then the more there are, the lighter the load is to do it. But there's still, in this kind of work, it's just like in the US. Like if you get a New York to be welcoming, people in other parts of the country are like, well, so what? That doesn't mean anything to us. We have nothing in common with New York. But if, when we got a date in Ohio, then we had a bunch of other Midwest cities that were like, oh, we want to turn around our population decline like Dayton did. And so they got on board, or, you get Nashville benefiting, and then a bunch of other southern cities are ready to get on board. And so I find the same with the international expansion. You have to have other places that have something in common with the places that you want to grow into, because when we were coming to Europe from the United States, they're like, well, you did this in the United States, but it's the US, you're like a nation of immigrants. Later on, it was like, oh, we don't want to listen to you because it's Trump. But at the beginning, it was, you're a nation of immigrants. And so we had to be able to, through the exchange in Europe with the Germans, and really build champions. And so, we have more traction now, but we still have to prove the model more in European countries so that other European countries will feel comfortable that it could work in their place. And so it's just a process of working hard in those places and demonstrating that they're gaining, just like Dayton or Nashville gained. You have to show that cities in Germany or in the UK are gaining in some way, whether it be economically, socially, social cohesion, whatever. And so we're in the process of doing that. And it's true that it gets easier, but you always have to, as we build into more spaces, like if we move into the Middle East or we want to go into Latin America. And again, if you all have connections for me in any of these places, please ping me afterwards, because we'd like to explore the whole world, and we are planning to. But yeah, in order to get to a tipping point in a certain continent or region, you have to be able to get enough places that see that it can work there, that other places are like, oh wait, we have to get on board too. And so that's the process. But the goal is not to get 50 by next year, but in 5 years, I think we could have a really good number. And eventually, I think we will hit a tipping point where there are countries that are like, shit, we have to do this. Pardon my language. Like, shoot, we have to do this, or we're going to fall behind.
But you do that through partnerships. Is this correct? So if you go to a country, look for who would be the ideal partner who shares sort of the same vision and who has the infrastructure in place to implement what you do.
So yeah, I mean, we've developed and are continuing to develop criteria for this. So we have a list of criteria. I mean, but first of all, a country has to make sense strategically. And so like Hungary at this point doesn't, because they've gone so far in the other direction that it just would be hard to get started. But Sweden we're looking at because things are headed sort of in a difficult direction, but they still have a lot of infrastructure. I could get into all the criteria, but I won't. But you need to have external criteria fit what you're trying to do, but also internal. So organizations need to fit criteria that include, can this group raise the resources? Have we vetted them with a lot of other partners? Can they work with government, with nonprofits, with the immigrant and refugee community? Sometimes we start with a city in a new place to see if the model can even work in that country. And then that city can help us identify a national partner or partners to do the work. And so yeah, I mean, we have criteria, but in the end, you got to work really hard to make sure that the partners are really good, because otherwise, it's not going to work.
Quick follow-up on that. So these partners are essentially your legs in these different cities and countries?
Yes. Yes.
Got it. Good model.
We'll see. So far.
Natalia, I see your digital hand is raised. Did you have a question or reflection? Also, it doesn't always have to be questions. If you're like, actually, I have a different perspective or something similar worked for me, by all means.
Hey, hi, everybody. I'm Natalia from Colombia. I'm the founder of IO2. We are a social enterprise providing ECD services for children. Thanks for the presentation. I didn't know about your work, so I'm excited to learn, and I will share it with the people responsible for immigration, for all the Venezuelan migrants coming, which are thousands every day to our city. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you on that. I have a question. We have developed a strategy for sharing our knowledge with others and scale around the world. We have done some knowledge sharing with Mexico, Africa, Brazil, and we have one network partner here in Colombia. He's not international, he's in Colombia. And my question is, what are the expectations you have on the long term in terms of funding coming from the international to the national service center, or we call it service center, but it's really like our headquarters where we really develop knowledge, we coordinate the network, how much, what does your business plan say in terms of the funding coming from international to national? Thank you.
So you're saying from like the international headquarters to the locals, not the other way around?
Yes, like how is the funding structure? Because the only way I could convince my board to go international is because we're going to gain a little bit of income from that also. It's going to be a funding source for the national work. Yeah. Besides the children of the world, like they always tell me there's enough children in Colombia already. Why are you going international? We still have a lot. The problem here is huge. But I think it's good not only for funding, it's also good for learning, like you mentioned. We learn a lot from our partners and the experiences in other countries. And because it also diversifies our work, it motivates our teachers to travel and teach somewhere else. I think it has a lot of positive impact. But the funding part, which the other person asked about, I want to know what's your vision in terms of long term?
Yes, that's a great question. So yes, we are planning to institute dues for our international partners. The strategy right now is we're spending a little bit more time sort of proving that we're worth it.
Okay.
So you know, kind of showing that you're indispensable. You know, like these are the services we provided you this year and last year, and this is, you know, and you know, we've brought up the idea of dues, and we haven't gotten any pushback because we've been methodical about making sure we're first demonstrating value, because people will pay if they feel like they're getting the value. But you know, the dues, it's at the beginning anyway, the dues aren't going to be this huge windfall of money that's going to, you know, pay for everything. But there are ways, and we're looking towards ways to, you know, increase revenue by doing this. Part of it is, you know, not just getting money from the members, but also there's other partners within the countries where we're working that might want consulting work, for example, national governments, et cetera. And we're already starting to do some of that work of doing consulting that can actually help subsidize the work, so you don't have to overcharge your, you know, your national partners. And yeah, the certification programs themselves can be revenue generating. If every city in the country wants to be certified, and certification is not free, and the training to get certified is not free, but if free, but if cities, you know, see that it's going to gain, they're going to gain economically. We're trying to figure out a system where if Australia is certifying every city and we're certifying them, that we could at least get a little bit of that funding, but it's still in process. But there are ways, and we don't have it all figured out, but we'd love to be in conversation with you and others that are on that journey, for sure.
Okay.
And also, yeah, Colombia, estamos muy interesados en Colombia por todo lo que dijiste. Yeah, we're very cognizant that Venezuela, I mean, we're dealing now in Germany with refugees from, you know, Syria and other parts of the Middle East, but the situation in Venezuela and all of the people arriving in Colombia and other countries it's a big priority for us. So we would love to go to Colombia and to explore possibilities there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Emiko, Alejandra, any, no need, but and if it just.
Well, I have another, if you guys don't. I was just curious, and mine is quick. Like, what has your, how have things changed in light of this current administration in the work that you're doing here in the U.S.?
I mean, it's a mixed bag. Overall, it's been depressing, but not bad for like the work.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably pretty consistent with others in this field. It energizes people, it energizes donors, it energizes cities. More cities have joined since Trump was elected than before. I mean, cities sort of understand more inherently that they need to move forward. I would say with some of the more sort of, because we work in all different political spectrums, small towns, big cities, and some of the more conservative communities that we're thinking of coming on board, you have to hold their hand a little bit more in this climate. But I mean, overall, it's a growth moment for the movement of welcoming. But at the same time, it's a horrible moment for the communities in which we're working, and that affects everybody, everything. It affects participation, civic participation, and that affects the work. But yeah, it's not all positive, all negative when it comes to the work, but it's all negative when it comes to people's lives.
Absolutely.
How do you measure impact?
Sure. So, I mean, we could have a couple-hour conversation about that.
I thought so.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's different ways that we measure impact, both nationally, and we're developing the systems to do it more comprehensively internationally. But I mean, part of the standard is part of that. You know, if you put in, you know, all of the different policies and programs in place, and you're reducing all of these barriers to integration, that impacts millions of people, and there are different ways that we can demonstrate how that's working. Although it takes time for a policy passes, and it's going to affect millions of people, because you know how many people can be influenced by in a country. But it still takes time for someone to go to college, even if their barriers are reduced to go to college, or someone to start a business, even if the barriers are reduced to starting a business. So we measure what we can. The standard is a good way for us to demonstrate. We know exactly, all of our cities, exactly where they are along the standard, even if they haven't gotten to the end. So we know what kind of policies have been created. We know what kind of systems are in place. So that's an important tool. But we also need tools like measuring what's the benefit in communities. And so we work with the Nashville Chamber of Commerce in Nashville to demonstrate the economic benefits that welcoming brought to Nashville. Or we worked with other researchers to show how, again, in a place like Dayton, the economy or the population decline reversed, and we've done that in a number of places, and we're starting to do that around the world. But that's a different kind of measuring impact. That's like, how do you make other cities jealous kind of measuring impact, frankly, and make them, or not jealous, but the kind of positive peer pressure that you want. But yeah, there's a lot more to it, and of course we all have to have our metrics and things.
But what does it mean, like on the individual level? If this is, I'm the refugee, and now I'm a refugee that is successful in your model, or the refugee that is still left alone. What does that mean for me if I'm this refugee? I'm fully integrated.
I'm going to bring us back into, so if David, maybe the shorter answer, I'm going to keep us on track. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Patrick, let's talk offline. But I mean, everything from the services, the access to the services that you have when you arrive, to the relationship, even interactions you're going to have with police, to the schools that your kids are going to go to, the English classes that you're going to try to obtain, to a number of other areas. It's all going to be better. It's all going to be easier. The language barrier is going to be much less of a factor. And there's a lot more to it, but it's like, it goes back to when I came to Ecuador. You want people, when you arrive in a community, to understand the value of why you're there. So that's the cultural piece. So you feel like you belong in a place is really important, and that's half of it. And the other half is all these institutions. But how are the police going to treat me? Have they been trained to have these types of et cetera, et cetera. So it's much too complicated to say any more than that right now, but I'd love to talk to you more about it offline. Did I do well, Brittany? Did I tie it up?
Beautiful.
Okay?
Awesome.
Thank you, Patrick, for the question. David. Yes. And let's host another huddle on impact measurement. I'm always looking to wrangle more hosts and more conversations. I have a question. Again, I think you talked about you and Rachel's experience of this. So Rachel, now the current ED. And from Ashoka's perspective, and what I think is so special about fellows and their teams, is that you are, from my perspective, and this is an invitation to everybody, I'd be curious to hear how you as a fellow or a fellow teammate see the role of the larger team, and also this kind of work, because I think Ashoka sees you as the steward of a very new idea or model, whose growth, if successful, is not only dependent on you waking up in the morning, right? And so I think
a little morbid, but that's okay.
What? Yeah. Okay, and we want you to wake up in the morning, but not burdened with the weight of the world on your shoulders, right? Because you're not the only steward or keeper of this work. And just from watching afar, and I know very little in the details of it, but from what I've seen of you and Rachel navigating this transition, and your ability to see your role beyond, to imagine beyond the executive director box, and to have those conversations about power and stewardship with your larger team, I think has been really beautiful to watch. And so for the other stewards of ideas that the world need, who are here on this call as well, I'm curious, David, what questions would you really encourage fellows and teammates, either one, both, and to be asking, either for you to ask yourself, for teammates to be asking each other? What conversations or questions would you say are really important to have?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So I start and then we open it up. Is that it?
Sure. I see Alejandra, I see your hand up. If it's really, maybe if you want to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear other people's perspectives on this one.
Yeah.
And so we were wondering, how did you handle your marketing? How did you make sure that people are aware of who you are and what your model is?
So Brittany, should I quickly talk about yours and then answer Alejandra?
Sure. So we are a partner who works with immigrants, housing. We pretty much cover every area of law in Chicago, and we do offer free legal aid to anybody who meets criteria. So they have to be in a certain level of poverty for us to be able to provide those services.
Great. Okay, so let's do a 1-2 here, maybe. So Alejandra, if it's okay, I'm gonna see if there's any thoughts around the role piece, and then we'll move to the marketing question if there's time. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was interesting, David, how you're dealing with that role, shifting that role, which kind of frees you up to do this international piece. So I am actually very curious in that. Actually, though, in our situation, our VP is the one that's doing the international expansion and strategy and development. But the dynamics are nonetheless just as it could be tough, but it's very delicate. So I would love to speak offline with you as to how you handled that and your board and just all the inner workings of that. So to be continued.
I look forward to it.
So when you come to Atlanta, let's just say we'll get together for a coffee.
Nice. Dancing goats, Decatur?
Dancing goats, that's it.
All right. Done.
Cool.
So Brittany, I want to leave space for anybody else, but you tell me what you want me to do.
Yeah, let's maybe leave a beat to see if other people have thoughts around, just like how, if there have been moments, questions that are helpful for you to be thinking through as far as thinking beyond just the standard paradigm of the executive director. And also, David, maybe people can add things in the chat as you, just because I think you're fresh in it in a pretty direct way. So I'd love to.
Sure. So should I jump in at this point then?
Cool. Yeah. And does anybody need to leave right at the hour? We could take an extra 5 maybe. Okay, Emiko does. So Emiko, if you have reflections or thoughts, you have interrupting power.
Thank you. I was just about to type a little short message, but David, I'd love to meet with you and Angelou in Atlanta if you're coming back. Specifically, my questions involve Atlanta politics, and I didn't want to kind of monopolize conversation about specifically Atlanta, but it's probably definitely a better conversation for in person. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Emiko. And yes, I look forward to.
Let's do the 3 of us.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. Should I go now, Brittany?
Yeah, go for it. And I typed a note to Alejandra that if we don't get to the marketing piece, at least we can connect and we'll figure it out. So
great.
I'm excited, David.
I'm excited for this Atlanta date in a week or 2. But anyone else is invited if they want to fly in or whatever. But as far as this piece around the questions that I would say people would want to be asking. I think, this is not, I started the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition after going back from Ecuador, a little 2 years after that in 2001, and eventually left Turk, and it's still going strong, and then started Welcoming America. And the same question I asked the first time around, I asked the second time around, would I trust, this is kind of my baby. As founders, we kind of can tend to think of our organizations as that. But it, it felt, am I getting this baby to college or to wherever they need to be independent? And do I trust that I've instilled it with the values that I hold dear? And so certainly with Welcoming America, by the time I was getting ready to make this change, I had been working for years on trying to build up the leadership and empower the leadership, and to step back and to step back and to step back, so that the leadership, other leaders could step in and step in. And so by the time this was happening, it was Rachel, but it was also a lot of other people around Rachel. Just they were leading and they were ready, but they also shared my values. And so when I wanted to do something like this, unconventional, and go off and do it, I trusted them with the organization, which is something that, it's not easy to trust some others with something that you've worked so hard on, and it's such an important part of, frankly, your identity. But I did. And so if I trusted them with the organization, then I trusted them with me too. Like if I'm going to trust them with the baby, I can trust them with me. And so that's how I was able to say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go, and I trust that you're going to support me in it. And so far, it's worked really well, because we have that respect and we continuously communicate, which is really important. But that's a question to ask. Have I built up this leadership? Would I trust them to turn this over? Would I trust them to have, to treat me fairly if I did that? So yeah, those are some questions.
Gotta hop off.
Beautiful.
Bye, guys.
Oh, bye. Who said bye? Bye, Anjali.
I see Anjali also. Yeah. Bye, guys. See you soon.
For those who are still.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Ooh.
That was awesome feedback.
Wow, that was right. Cool.
I have to head out too as well, but thank you so much, David and Brittany, for making sure I was looped in. But hopefully I'll see you soon, David.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Nice to meet you
all.
all.
On the other side.
Nice to meet you too.
Bye.